News with Anne Fulham.
Good evening. In the second edition news tonight, Iraq standing firm in the face of American threats. On the trail of Christopher Skase's hidden millions. And
what do we have here? It appears
Hollywood bosses think animation will make them rich this year. Iraq is still not saying it will cooperate with the United Nations inspectors who are due there this weekend to check on stockpiles of weapons. It's not known what military hardware Saddam Hussein has in store, but his time is running out. President George Bush says he'll use force to protect those inspectors should they need it.
To help guarantee long-term security in the Gulf, the defense ministers of the United States and Kuwait signed a 10-year cooperation agreement allowing the US to stockpile military hardware and send aircraft and warships in the event of a renewed crisis. Whatever happens, Iraq will be contained.
I'm proud today as the U.S. Secretary of Defense on behalf of the President and the American people to sign this agreement, which will go a long way towards ensuring that the kind of events that occurred a little over a year ago will never happen again.
President Bush, touring Western states, said there had been no response to his demands that Iraq allow unhindered United Nations inspections of weapons sites.
Haven't heard anything today.
Around 60 U.S. military aircraft remain on standby, and whether they are activated or not, defensive Patriot anti-missile batteries will be sent to Saudi Arabia.
There are no troops moving. Nobody's going anywhere.
While United Nations officials hope to hear from Iraq later today and President Bush promises no Son of Desert Storm campaign, American patience is running out. Saddam must comply with UN resolutions, Mr. Bush said. He should not miscalculate again.
Canada has joined the growing number of countries calling for the United Nations to intervene in the Yugoslavian civil war. Canada has asked for an urgent meeting of the Security Council. Croatian radio, meanwhile, reports fresh outbreaks of fighting in several towns. So far, though, no action from the huge column of federal tanks massed on the Croatian border.
This mighty column of 700 Federal Army vehicles is now understood to have stopped at the Croatian border after setting off from the Serbian capital of Belgrade, cheered on by Serbian well-wishers. The Federal Army hasn't said why the column is on the move. One suggestion is that the army may be preparing to relieve some of its bases in Croatia. The Federal Army has called up thousands of reservists within the last 2 days to assist in the mobilization. Their dispatch is seen as one of the most important signs yet that the latest attempt to construct a ceasefire in Yugoslavia has failed. Within Croatia, jets belonging to the Yugoslav Air Force yesterday continued to strike from skies above the Adriatic. Among their targets, Vukovar was badly damaged. But Croatian forces have had some successes. They captured this Serbian bunker, complete with its ammunition dump. The United Nations is now being pressed into action by Canada, whose government believes the Yugoslav situation threatens international peace and security. Canada's request for an urgent meeting of the Security Council follows the European Community's decision not to send an armed peacekeeping force to Croatia. But EC foreign ministers meeting in The Hague have agreed to study the possibility of a later deployment. They first want to see what can be done to make those involved in the Yugoslav Peace Conference carry on the negotiations. Next week's session of the Peace Conference is due to take place at the Dutch Foreign Ministry. It may be the last if there's no effective ceasefire.
Here in Australia, federal authorities have uncovered $1 million forgery and immigration racket. Fake citizenship documents fooled officials into issuing genuine Australian passports to Fijian Indians.
The racket had been active for several months. 60 fake citizenship certificates were used by Fijian Indians to obtain passports. The forgeries were so good, they got through rigorous checks by Foreign Affairs staff at Sydney passport offices. Police today showed a real certificate, then the forgery. Reporters could not tell the difference. The only obvious flaws are the seal and the number.
The people who've obtained these certificates have paid between $20,000 and $30,000 Australian each for them. On the basis of the issuing of these certificates, we believe that now 50 Australian passports have been issued.
Fijian Indians came to Australia in large numbers after the Rambuka coup. It's unclear whether those who used the fake papers knew they were forged. The racket was so professional, so brazen, the perpetrator advertised his services as an immigration agent. on Fijian ethnic radio, which is why so many were sucked in. Also today, federal police showed $1.2 million in counterfeit American notes. They were seized at a printing shop in Warren, near Dubbo, New South Wales. Brian Patrick Foran, a printer from Warren, and graphic artist Michael June of Dubbo have been bailed in Dubbo Court on counterfeit charges. Howard Saker, 10 Eyewitness News.
In business news, the chase for Christopher Skase's millions is unveiling some surprises. Here's the Business Review Weekly's Robert Gottliebson.
As the lawyers begin the complex task of trying to attract Christopher Skase back to Australia, some of the best accounting minds in the country are now focusing on the web of companies that Skase set up to surround his Quintex operation. At his bankruptcy hearing, Skase claimed that his assets had been reduced to no more than $6,000 and that his personal debts stood at a staggering $172 million. But Christopher has embraced a lifestyle in Spain which indicates that he has access to a much larger pool of money. This week's cover story in BRW magazine reveals how the accountants now think that Skase may be the beneficial owner of $5 million worth of assets. Establishing that figure has involved a painstaking examination of past transactions, including the Quintex antique purchases, the way fees were paid to his private company, and the method of constructing some of the big Quintex tourist properties. One of the mysteries is exactly what Christopher Skase loaded into a container, which is shipped to Britain and then to Spain. The bill of lading includes items ranging from a pogo stick to a Rolls Royce, which was of course gifted to his stepdaughter. If Christopher returns to Australia, he'll have the opportunity to unravel some of the mysteries. If he doesn't return, then the accountants plan to concentrate their efforts on Skase's relatives, who still remain in Australia and who had connections with the Skase family fortune. It's probably the most complex bankruptcy Australia has ever seen. This is Robert Gottliebson.
Well, Channel 10 has reported a good financial result. Just a year after being placed in receivership, the network is back in the black.
A year after punishing debt levels forced Channel 10 and Channel 7 into receivership and 9 into severe financial problems, 10 reports it's back in the black. The receiver will soon hand over to the new owners, Westpac, which is acquiring 100% ownership of the Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane stations. 10 Chief Executive Gary Rice says the network is again making a modest profit, though he wouldn't specify a detailed outlook.
We have a viable network, we have a viable business. We're going into the future with a degree of great confidence.
Mr. Rice says the strategy to restore the network is working. The year has seen the reduction of overseas program costs, lower staff levels, wage cuts and less costs for other services. Simultaneous with the 10 network recovery, the 9 network reduced costs, staff and debt levels, and this week reported a $55 million profit. The 7 network has also restructured and decreased debt. It has been the most turbulent year in Australian TV history.
We've been able to turn a distinctly negative situation into a pretty strongly positive one fairly quickly, and therefore arrest that drastic downward trend that occurred about this time last year relatively quickly.
Mr. Rice said that with strong new programs in the schedule, such as Hard Copy, and the return of favourites like Murder, She Wrote, 10 was back as a full fighting force. Ultimately, he expected 10 to be a very strong business. Howard Saker, 10 Eyewitness News.
After the break, the frustrating delays for Western hostages in Beirut, and for the first time, Russia's frontline fighters in the skies over England.
He's going now, right? He's not. Your chance to come.